Hi, everyone. My name's Derek Covington Smith, and I'm going to be your host for Spotlight On. Spotlight On is an interview podcast where we talk to different artists working and living in Mississippi. When I moved back to Mississippi, I opened up my studio, the Little Yellow Building, and began teaching. And once the coronavirus hit and really settled in, it became quite lonely. As artists, we're always used to having a lonely studio practice and being one-on-one with ourselves. But when you take out the option of having that community, it becomes really hard. And that's where Spotlight On was born. I started reaching out to artists all over Mississippi and interviewing and learning more about their lives. I'd like to invite you to come along and join me as we talk to everyone and anyone who wants to share their art and their life with us. So I hope you tune in, I hope you subscribe, and join us for Spotlight On. Hey everyone, and thank you for joining us for another Spotlight On interview. This week we have Sam Clark. Sam Clark is a sculptural artist, works in ceramics, but for me, he's much more of a visual storyteller, and you'll get to find out a little bit more about that. Sam, thank you for joining me, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your art?
Well, Derek, it's a pleasure. Glad to be on the show. So growing up in Mississippi, I, like a lot of artists, really enjoy drawing, and I grew up watching He-Man and Transformers and all of those weekday afternoon cartoons. So that kind of fueled my imagination, and just sci-fi and those types of stories. Those are the things I like. And when I was growing up in school, I didn't take any art classes. I went to a small school, and I was kind of the kid that drew, and I thought I was pretty good until I got to college. And when everybody was asking the question, what you're going to do, I thought, well, I'll be an artist. And I got into some of the art classes and realized that I was way behind all these other kids that had been in AP and, been winning awards and all of that. And of course I had my mom that said I was good, but that was about it. So growing up, I just wanted to be an artist. And then it was just a long journey of taking, courses in college, and really just a lot of practicing and growing, and it's just a long, long journey, and still on that journey. So just that's it.
You had, I believe I read that you went to Savannah College of Art and Design for a while and studied sequential art.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that, because for me, that was something I was in the 90s. I was heavy into Marvel, heavy into X-Men. Jim Lee is the whole reason I know how to draw a figure. And actually, and then the other artists are how I know when I'm exaggerating too much. And, but I was going to go, and I held myself back because of financial issues and just, it's a lot of money. But tell us about your experience at SCAD in Savannah, because that was, that's a checklist for a lot of people. That's an awesome school.
Well, two things: being in an environment where other people like-minded have the same goals, and like you said, interest in, Marvel and all of those properties. That was really a lot of fun. But then the other thing I tell people when they're like, should I go to SCAD? I'm always like, it's a good school, but a lot of schools are probably just as good and a lot less expensive. And then you get to school, and even the good professors, it's really about how self-motivated you are, because they give you these projects, and you can be lazy and you can turn in something that's, not your best effort, or you can really go for it. And I was a little bit older when I went, and I played around after college and didn't really have that serious mindset. But when I was in Savannah, I had waited tables a long time, and I thought, I don't want to do that forever. And I had a little bit of an older vantage point. I really enjoyed it. But even that, it's sort of, I studied the figure drawing. We just drew and drew and drew all the time. And I think that's where I really grew a lot as far as perspective drawing and figure drawing. But it's kind of funny. Also during that time, and I look back and I don't even remember why, but I bought some clay and I think the idea was I would model the figure and then be able to draw the figure from different angles and things. But I just really enjoyed playing with clay. And so I graduated from Savannah and I moved to Atlanta, and I worked for a junior college teaching art appreciation. And then I got a studio and I just started buying clay and playing with clay. And really, I mean, it was really crummy work at that time. And I had a lady that was next to me, and she was a potter, and I would see her throwing on the wheel. So I studied drawing, and I think still that's a tremendous help to me to think about shapes and forms, and even little characters I do are very funny and whimsical, but I do try to give a believability to like their motion, and if they're reaching for something, like what the anatomy would be doing. So I don't draw comics, but all of that drawing helps inform, I think, a correct structure for the work I do now. Even though it's not realistic work, it's kind of, I think of it like clay cartoons almost. But there is a I do feel like I have a debt to Savannah for that's the study of anatomy and figure drawing that is kind of like an underpinning knowledge that helps in the sculpting realm.
And now the bulk of your work is focused in on these fun creatures, trolls and dragons. And for me, it reminds me of, you had mentioned He-Man, but they live in the same world as like the Last Unicorn and the Hobbit and those from 1976. And it's just, they have these really cool, sketchy feel to them, even though they live in life. They live in 3 dimensions. Tell us about your thought process, or how you even came up with these creatures.
The fact that you know the movie The Last Unicorn, I'm impressed. And yeah, and the old animated Hobbit, like maybe it was made in the 70s or something, like just love that stuff. And also where I grew up, I just played in the woods a lot. Like I would just go, into the woods and not come out till the sun came down. And I had a stick that was my sword, and, you're looking, I always tell people when I do craft shows and they're like, where do you get the ideas for these weird creatures? And I tell them, I just wish when I was a kid that I would find something like that, like you'd overturn a log and this little creature would scamper away. And I like to kind of imagine that these creatures have come from places like that. And you wake up and they're in your kitchen or hanging out on your bookshelf, but they actually came from the woods, and that if you follow them back to their little hole, you might get to travel back to that little magic place where they stay, So the stories and things, yeah, I feel like when people see the work and it just gets their imagination going, that maybe there is a place like that somewhere, maybe under a bridge. If you're in the right place at the right time, you might step across that little portal and be in a totally, magical place.
Yeah. And when you, for anybody that I highly suggest you go to samclarkart.com. He's got his store there is filled with these creatures, and I can see them living in my world and turning a corner and it's offering me the cup of coffee, or I catch it eating that slice of pizza. And I love the fact that exists just out in the universe today. Tell us about your process of making a clay sculpture creature. Like, how all do you go through it? Because I know that no two are alike. They're all hand built and they're all made individually. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a fun thing too. At every craft show, people, they start looking and then it dawns on them that they're all different. And I tell them it's just like people. Everybody's different. Everybody, they have their own personalities. But the process that I sort of arrived at, it's called slab building. So you take a piece of clay and you make a flat piece out of it, and then you can form it into like a cylinder. And so the body of most of my pieces is just a cylinder of various sizes. And then the head maybe is a pinch pot that is turned upside down, kind of like a mushroom. And then you attach that, and then the arms and the feet and ears and all of these little extra pieces are kind of made separately, almost like parts of a puzzle. And then it's kind of like assembling like a doll or something. And it's also kind of like playing with a toy, because it's like you're positioning this piece of clay, but it's like a toy or something. So the process is very, very fun. And a lot of times I'll have 2 or 3 pieces and I'll have them lined up next to each other, where one's looking at the other one or one's gesturing with his hand. And I like to have it where it appears that they're just frozen in a gesture, like they're reaching for that cup of coffee, or they're about to say something, and you just happen upon them right at that moment. And I feel like because they're all different, there's an energy there. Like each one is, when you arrange them in a different composition, there is a story that kind of develops. But the process is hand building, essentially. I do use the wheel with some things, but with the animals and creatures, they're hollow, and you can push from the inside, and you can kind of like bulge out a stomach, or and the hands and all of those things again are attached. So it's done in sections and pieces, and then they're left to dry, and then they go through a lot of glazing layers for the different colors. And I do a sort of an antiquing process where you put a black glaze over the color glazes and you wash it off with a sponge, and it gets in all the cracks and line work, and almost like an ink drawing. It really makes the details pop. And it kind of gives them that old antique look, which I like a lot.
Yeah. Tell me, or anybody who's listening, what your art practice in Mississippi is like, because every artist is completely different in the way they handle their day and the way they go about just thinking about how they're going to tackle the day.
Well, I've spent so many years talking to other artists at craft shows, and I'm always like, what's the magic formula? How do you do this? Do you make a living at it, or do you do something else? And just fascinating. And you hear a lot of different stories, and there's really not one formula. People do things differently. But for me, I was fortunate that after Savannah, I came back to Mississippi and eventually ended up working at the Mustard Seed. And when I started working there, I told them off the bat that I wanted to do craft shows. And I said, I need like Friday as a studio day. So they agreed to that. And so I worked Monday through Thursday. And then Friday I had as my studio day in my garage at home. And through the year, I would work up enough work to try to go to 2 shows. And I did that for several years, just doing the 2 shows. And then eventually I really wanted to, get to where I was doing that full time. But it took about 10 years before I think the work really reached a level that I was fast enough, knew exactly what I wanted to do, and could come in and go, today I need to make 10 of these and just knock it out. So for me, about 3 years ago was when I really stepped into full time, just going to craft shows. So I had a schedule of what I needed to make in a month, and, projecting what, if I sold everything, what that would that pay the bills and everything. And then you roll the dice, you sign up for the show. If you get in, you go to the show, and maybe it rains that weekend, and, or maybe it's a great show, and with that, I was like, okay, law of averages. You just go ahead and plan that 1 or 2 shows will just not be good for whatever reason, but you do enough that it works out, law of averages. And then sometimes you have a really good show, and you take that money and you put that aside for later when things are a little bit slow. And there's a seasonal aspect to the craft shows where during the fall, they're real, were pretty heavy. And then you have a few in the spring that are pretty good. But in the middle of the summer, it's hot. People are taking vacations, and there's really not a lot going on. But when it gets to the fall, people sort of start thinking about Christmas shopping and those things. And the main thing that I realized was every artist that I talked to, one common thread was they all had their bread and butter. Something that is in that $20 to $50 range that, they probably hate making it, and it's probably not very challenging, but they make a lot of it and they sell a lot of it. And if you're counting on that income monthly, you've got to find that bread and butter. For painters, I think they do prints, and they can sell $20 to $40 prints. And for sculptors, you might do or potters, you might have like coasters or coffee cups that are not too time consuming. But you also need to do that challenging piece or try something that you're like, you don't even think you can do it, and even fail miserably and go, well, that didn't work out. But every month I try to do something that stretches, to grow, and I'm okay if it doesn't work. And I certainly don't care if it sells. I'm like, this is going to lead to the next thing so that I get better. And then I spend 90% of my time doing the bread and butter, which for me are the little coffee trolls, and they're still fun, and I love making them. And they've evolved over time. Also, they've got pizza, and they're eating ice cream, and so they keep evolving, and that's always fun. But just monthly basis, having markets, whether it's online or craft shows, which everything in this year was so bizarre for everybody. It really 90% shifted to online sales. And then I was like, okay, I got to catch up on the website. Like I gotta figure this out. And there was a learning curve of like, how do you market? How do you use Instagram and social media? How do you do email list? And all of that was like a new ball of, to figure out. But it's been a learning curve, and I think you're always getting better at that. But so far I've been pretty amazed at how just being consistent and monthly offering your work, it's not a ton of money, but it works. And,
right.
And I think it can work even better as I figure some of those things out.
That was going to be one of my next questions, was how have you dealt with the not being in public? Because I know you do a lot of those trade shows and you do a lot of the markets, and you had one recently. They had a market somewhere close to you that you went and you had your table set up, and I saw it on Instagram, and like, it's such an awesome setup. You've got all these creatures everywhere that you just, I would love to imagine that they just all come to life and scatter and then like go exactly where they sit, because they're all set up in these little story sets. But all that's changed. The entire world's changed. And how have you coped with it? Because a lot of yours was physical interaction.
Well, one thing that I realized, the online sales are really great. And, you don't have to worry about a show being rained out. You don't have to worry like, will 2 people show up or 500 people show up? You just post it. But after 8 months, you really miss social interaction. And, somebody might see something on Instagram, you might get so many likes or, but that's just a button. But when you set up and people come by and they're talking about it, they're laughing and they're like, oh, that looks like Uncle Jim. They're, just being around other people and their reaction is sort of like, just that's an aspect that I think every artist loves. And it's kind of like a good critique. If people walk by and they're not stopping, or for me, if they didn't laugh, I was like, okay, I need to change something. Like the whole point of what I do is I want people to smile. Even if they don't buy something, I want them to like chuckle or, find it funny. But I think in the future, you're going to have to still have those human interactions, and even the best photograph can't compare to someone who's seeing it in the real world and picking it up, and they get a better understanding of just how big it is, and also a challenge online when you deal with shipping. If you have a really big piece, it could cost like $100 or $150 to ship. I mean, with ceramics, it's heavy. So this whole year, I really have focused on small things. And when I'm at a market, I can take a big piece and put it in a box and hand it to them, or walk it to their car. And I'm like, they got it. It didn't break in the mail, didn't get lost. It didn't cost me $200 to ship. So, the online is good for small things that you can ship and you can reach a wide audience. But to get actual sort of human interaction, and also visiting with other artists, you spend a lot of time in your studio and you listen to podcasts. But when you get to a show and it's early in the morning, probably before the sun's up, everybody's clanking their tents together and drinking coffee. And where have you been? Oh, I've been in Texas. Oh, are there any good shows out in Texas? Oh, yeah. And all that camaraderie and seeing other people's cool art. I mean, that's something I really miss. And I hope we reach a point where it's safe to do more of that, that, because I think you really need both. I don't really think, and also every show that I would ever do, I would get people to sign up for my mailing list. And that just, again, directly saying, hey, if you're interested, I do a mailing list. And people are like, yeah, versus trying an online, impersonal sort of like, it's just easier to hand somebody a pen and they're talking to you and they kind of already like what you're doing,
They trust the handshake, right? It's if you're face to face with somebody, they're getting to see you physically, and everything that's coming out of your mouth is coming from a source. And then as soon as you put a screen in front of it, you're still the person who's asking for the email, but that's not coming from a physical source that they can see. They don't know who's asking for it. So they'll click off of it or just, that's, I don't want to be bothered by that. But if they know it's coming from you, like, yeah, of course, let's sign up for it. You had mentioned in part of your creation talk that, you have your bread and butter pieces, and yours are the dragons and the trolls and all that fun stuff. When you create for you, what do you create?
Well, it's funny because it's hard to answer that, because what I like to do, I still love to draw, and I like to draw something and not worry about, can it be made? Like, not think about how much weight is this going to support, how big, and then after it's drawn, then see if I can make it. I made a lot of dragons, but I really wanted to have a dragon that was flying. And I thought, well, with a big, heavy ceramic piece, how do you make it look like it's off the ground? And I have a piece that I made, and I never sold it. I like it because it was a real challenging, like, the pieces. There's a picture of it on my website, but there's a tree behind the dragon, and there's a girl riding on the dragon, but the tree is actually what's supporting the dragon, but it's made in a way that it looks like he's just passing past the tree. And you have this big, heavy thing with these tiny little wings, but it looks like he's gracefully floating by. And I think some of the fun of what I like to do is make something that is really challenging to figure out, how is it going to be supported? And when you make real complicated pieces, clay tends to shrink and it can crack. And, if something is like, if you had a long neck and a big fat head and the clay's not dry or it's slightly wet, it's just going to start to slump. So you just encounter a lot of challenges that are fun. And that's typically, and I don't do a lot of those. Like I said, bread and butter takes up most of my time, but every now and then I'm like, okay, I need to do something that's, really cool. And the other thing is when you do a show, like, bringing those pieces are bigger pieces, and someone might be walking by and they're like 20 feet away and it catches their eye. And then they come over and see the other things. And, typically those are really labor intensive pieces, and they are really expensive, and I don't really sell a lot of them, but they're great conversation pieces. It gets people in the booth, and then they end up buying something smaller. But every now and then, I was in Texas and I had one of these big pieces that I'd lugged around for like half a year, and I never thought I would sell it. And a lady came up and she was like, I want that. And I thought, she hasn't seen the price tag yet. And I said, well, I told her the price. She goes, yeah, I want it. And I was like, okay. So sometimes they do sell,
That's like with any gallery. I mean, you're operating your booth exactly like a small gallery. And with a gallery, it's nice to have that huge statement piece that pulls everybody in, that the general public can't afford that. It's there because it needs to be enjoyed. And then while they're there, oh, here's prints of the artist's work, or here's this, or here's that, here's the other options that are affordable and that we understand, we need to have, and that we love to have for people. I just lost. Oh, that's what it was.
Can I tell you one thing?
Yes, please.
This is so encouraging. They're the pieces that most people are like, well, okay, that's too expensive. But there's a show in Ocean Springs, the Peter Anderson Festival, and there was a girl this girl was in high school, and she came, and every year she would come in and talk to me, and she loved to draw and this and that. And like on the third year, she showed up, and I had a big piece. She goes, that's the piece I want. And she whipped out her money, and I was like, And she goes, I've been saving for 3 years to get one of your big dragons.
Wow.
And I was like, when a piece of artwork speaks to somebody, they can find a way. And I do think it's very important to price things appropriately. Like, I wouldn't price something really high just hoping someone with that much money came by. But if you put that X amount of hours in, you're like, that's a fair price. Mm-hmm. But anybody can, become a fan, and they can save up money if they really like it. And this girl was like in high school, and I thought, wow, I wouldn't have, I didn't buy a nice piece of art till I was like 30.
Yeah, same. But, and I had a similar situation. It was grandparents. Grandparents had contacted me because their granddaughter had seen one of my paintings, and it was one that I remember doing it, but it was tucked away at some point on the internet that was just hidden because it was one that I had done personally for myself. And she found it and related to it, and that found a way to get the painting. And I was, you never know who your art is talking to, and you never know their means either. That's what aggravates me so much, is that we're a visual society, and a lot of people will write everybody off just based on first impression with looks. No. You don't know that person from anyone. You need to treat them all the same. If they're interested in your artwork, by God, you feed into that, because that is someone who wants to know more about you and what you're doing. And that's what's important. What I was going to ask is, how's your Mississippi artist experience been? It's different in this state than it's been in other locations that I've lived, and the artist experience, we're very spread out, and we have to have these bigger group gatherings that we can get together. But just in general, how's Mississippi for you?
Well, this is a secret you almost don't want to get out, but it is dirt cheap to live in Mississippi. And I listen to a lot of podcasts, and there are a lot of artists that I follow that worked in California, and they have been able to move back to Kentucky and live in their small town and just do everything online. And they're like just amazed at how much money they save by not being in a big city. And also in some of the really strong art markets like Santa Fe, the competition is fierce. And I mean, if you're not in the best gallery, you just, it's too expensive to be out there. Mm-hmm. So I think Mississippi, you can, and for me, I think I always dreamed of having an amazing studio, but I was like, you know what? A garage is really all I need. I just need some space to put my junk and a little 5x5 table, and, I can make whatever I need to make. And so, yeah, being in a place where it's relatively affordable. And then, with the internet, it's amazing. I mean, I've sold stuff to people in Denmark and Japan, and, you can send things anywhere. It's just crazy. So you don't have to be in a big city. And then, really we're being close to New Orleans is actually it's one of those things where it's so close. You're like, I mean, I know it's shut down right now, but I would go down to New Orleans and there's so much cool artwork and music. And I mean, there's people that come from all over the world just to be in my backyard, so I feel like, and we're close to Atlanta and close to Nashville. I feel like if you live in a place that's really affordable, and then a couple of times a year, you take a workshop somewhere or you take a vacation, and spend some money, but then come back to where it's cheap, So I like Mississippi a lot, and getting to shows and do it, that's kind of a social network where and they're from all over. So you're kind of like this art nomad that, the people you see on a regular basis, you really don't have to live where they live. If you go to the shows, you'll end up, sometimes it always amazes me where some of these older guys who have been doing pottery, they have been doing it since the 60s. And they've got a group of friends that they've seen at this particular show for years. And it's kind of like their little reunion. And I love that. That's another reason, I was like, man, I hope these shows survive and you still have that camaraderie, because it's really cool.
I think they'll come back stronger once there's a comfort level that's come up and people have been just deprived of social interaction for over a year, it'll come back way stronger than it was before. I think the key from here on out, and especially for artists, because it's all been in our hands now. The world blows up and we actually get to control our futures for a hot second. And with everything moving online, we get to present ourselves, and everybody's paying attention because that's the platform. Making sure that when we get to interact, making sure that all of it stays strong together, that we're doing physical presence, but then we don't have to lose touch because, look, we've all learned how to stay connected. I think that that's going to be a huge part of moving forward and getting the artist community, and especially Mississippi, continue to grow and continue to be visually represented everywhere, not just to ourselves, but showing the rest of the state how great showing the rest of the country how great a lot of our artists are here. I wanted to get one last question in. And really, you've been giving such great advice throughout the entire recording. But if we could hone in on one piece of advice for any new artist or someone who's thinking about going into the arts, what would that be?
Man, I didn't think about that. I was like, what are things that I really struggle with? And one, this is just a personal thing. It took me a while to get over the fact that nobody owes me anything. I used to sort of think, well, if I had been to a better school, if this gallery would promote me, then I would be doing better. And I thought, nobody owes me anything. Get off your butt and just work hard. You read about this artist, so, well, their parents really supported them, and they were patted on the back, and it just, at the end of the day, you just got to do what you really enjoy doing. Be yourself and work hard and be consistent. And that's as good a formula as anything.
That's awesome. Yeah, yes, I absolutely 100% agree with that. The students I have, one of our mantras is that hard work beats talent when talent won't work hard. It doesn't matter who else in the room might be better at you than you right now. You have the option to put in the time and put in the effort and get better and become who you want to be, the artist that you want to be. So Sam, they can find you at samclarkart.com. That got me right there. samclarkart.com. And then they can also find you on Instagram at samclarkart. Is there any other place that they can find you or find your work to purchase or? So Sam Clark Art is pretty much all of my social platforms. I have been making some videos for YouTube, and it's really because I meet people and they'll ask me, what's your process? And if they go to Sam Clark Art on YouTube, then there's these little time lapse, or even other teachers, I'm like, if you watch this, you could just get some clay and you could do it. It's almost, for me, I learn by doing things. And I think I've watched so much YouTube and pick up so many things by watching people do it and then just trying it. So I thought for kids that have an interest in clay, that they could watch those and, kind of pick it up, I think. But yeah, that's all my social medias, and the Instagram, I try to be regularly posting on there, and I try to have monthly sales of something, on my website pretty regularly. That's about it, really. Well, thank you for being on with Sam. Thank you for just sharing your experience and everything you've been through, your learning experience. I appreciate it, and I know that our listeners appreciate it. So we will catch back up with you hopefully at some point. If anybody missed anything, it will all be in the show notes down below. He's got samclarkart.com, at samclark art on Instagram, and we will be back with you again next week. Y'all have a great one.